I wanted to be here myself to call out what is a travesty of justice, and I think everybody around the country can see that. President Trump is a friend, and I wanted to be here to support him.
For too long, the PRC has been playing by a different set of rules with unfair and anti-competitive economic practices.
As much as I admire him, I'm hoping somebody can beat Larry Hogan.
Welcome to America Decides. I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News in Washington. Today's a great example of what this campaign year is shaping up to be. Up in New York, former President Donald Trump's sidekicks staged a bit of a sideshow outside the Manhattan courthouse, where Trump's one-time supporter Michael Cohen endured a second day on the stand. Cohen today detailed how he arranged for payments to adult film actor Stormy Daniels and began facing cross-examination by the former president's attorneys. But the Trump team is hoping more attention is paid to a courthouse visit by the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who showed up outside to defend the former president. So did potential running mates Doug Burgum and Vivek Ramaswamy, and a handful of Republican congressmen. Then there's President Biden, who here today in Washington did something he once criticized Donald Trump for doing, hiking tariffs on China. Oh, what a difference 4 years makes. After what the White House describes as a more thoughtful and studied review of potential tariffs, the president, in essence, backtracked on his 2020 attacks on Trump and is now embracing bipartisan calls to get tougher on America's #1 adversary. He's hoping the moves boost his standing with voters, believing Biden hasn't done enough to buoy the economy. But let's begin with what went on inside the Manhattan criminal courthouse today. And for that, we turn to Errol Barnett. Good to see you, sir. What did we hear from Michael Cohen today on the stand?
Hey there, Ed. Great to see you. I was in the main courtroom for most of the day, and prosecutors continued with what was really key testimony from Cohen, finally getting to the bedrock of this case, the 34 felony counts of falsified business records. Prosecutors methodically walked through each and every one. We're talking about 11 checks, 11 invoices, and 12 so-called vouchers or ledgers from the Trump side, which confirm that payments were made to Cohen in 2017, each in the amount of $35,000, which went beyond the $130,000 he says he paid to Stormy Daniels as part of that hush money deal. The prosecution then walked through the FBI raid on Cohen's home, office, and other properties, which is what led to his ultimate guilty plea, and when he effectively flipped on Donald Trump. But Ed, the defense got their opportunity to cross-examine Cohen, and that started with a simple question from Donald Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche. She said, "We've never met, you don't know me, but on TikTok, you called me a, quote, crying little expletive." To which Cohen replied, "Sounds like something I would say," as the prosecution objected and the judge sustained the objection. Effectively, that characterized the entire afternoon as Trump's defense team tried to characterize Cohen as someone motivated by money, as someone who was not loyal to Donald Trump and effectively couldn't be trusted. So a pretty remarkable day in the courthouse.
Sure seems like it. And this is streaming, so you probably could have shared that expletive, but we'll leave it out. Errol Barnett, the testimony continues through the week. We thank you for joining us. President Biden, meanwhile, is taking steps to keep China from undercutting U.S. companies. The administration's hiking tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, semiconductors, batteries, solar cells, steel, and aluminum. And in an interview with Yahoo Finance today, the president was asked what he thinks China might do to respond.
What they'll do, I don't think it'll lead to any international conflict or anything like that. But I think they'll probably try to figure out how they can raise tariffs maybe on products that are unrelated.
Nancy Cortez is CBS News chief White House correspondent and joins us from the North Lawn. So, Nancy, what are the economic and political reasons for doing this?
Well, let's take economic first, Ed. So the Biden administration argues that they have been watching China basically flaunt the rules for years now. That what China does is it floods certain companies with money and enables those Chinese companies in turn to lower their prices and flood the world with goods that are so cheap that other companies, U.S. companies, European companies, simply can't compete. And they've been warning China for a long time not to do this, to knock it off, and it's basically been met with deaf ears. That's in addition to cyber attacks and cyber theft, and all the other things that the U.S. government has accused China of doing. And so essentially what the president is doing today is saying, OK, well, if you're going to artificially lower your prices, guess what? We are going to slap massive tariffs on your goods, basically making it more expensive for Chinese companies to sell goods to the U.S. Now, politically, this is a major about-face for this president who, as you pointed out, criticized President Trump for doing something similar, not exactly the same, back when he was president. He said it would spark a trade war, but now he is embracing these tariffs, partly because it is an election year and big manufacturing states like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, like Michigan are states that typically tend to appreciate moves like this, even if it doesn't mean that there's some huge rush of new manufacturing jobs in those states as a result. It is seen as standing up for U.S. manufacturing, and that was what President Biden said he was doing today.
And so bottom line then, that's the economics, that's the politics of it. What does it mean for the average American consumer?
That's a great question. It depends on how China responds. If China, for example, raises its prices to make up for these increased tariffs, it could mean that American consumers pay more for goods than they did before. I asked the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai about that today. Take a look at what she had to say. When Trump hiked tariffs on Chinese goods, it led to some increased prices for U.S. customers. How can you be sure the same thing won't happen again?
First of all, I think that link in terms of tariffs to prices has been largely debunked. What I would say is that what the president has instructed that we do is to focus on making our supply chains more resilient.
So that was really interesting. Basically, the criticism from a lot of Democrats and candidate Biden for a long time was that Trump's moves to basically slap tariffs across the board on Chinese goods was going to lead to increased prices for Americans. And what the U.S. Trade Representative is now saying is that really didn't end up being the case, and that's part of the reason they were comfortable going the route that they did today.
And, you know, it's about $18 billion of Chinese goods that are getting the tariffs will apply to. Beyond that, this is far more expansive than what Trump ever did, right?
Well, what Trump did was impose tariffs across the board, not as high as the ones that we saw today. EVs, for example, going from a 25% tariff to a 100% tariff. These tariffs were targeted on about $18 billion worth of goods. The Trump tariffs were not as large, but they were slapped on $300 billion worth of goods. So across the board, and actually what Trump is threatening to do if he wins re-election is to impose across the board tariffs, 10% tariffs, not just on Chinese goods, but on all goods coming into the U.S. So you're seeing two very different approaches from these two presidents. One that wants to impose these broad tariffs across the board that he says will help the American consumer, and one who is looking at these more targeted tariffs in key industries.
All right. Well, we will see how it all plays out and whether it indeed does what the White House is hoping it does, which is win over skeptics concerned he's not doing enough to boost the American economy. We'll see. 174 days to go until Election Day. Nancy Cortez at the White House, thank you so much. Coming up, Israeli tanks push deeper into Rafah as battles rage in northern Gaza. Senator Tammy Duckworth joins us next for the latest on the war and the surgeon stuck in Gaza she says once saved her life. You're streaming America Decides. Israeli forces forged deeper into Rafah today, raising fears of more civilian casualties in the Israel-Hamas war. The United Nations estimates nearly 450,000 people have fled the city since May 6th. Israel's allies, including the U.S., have warned against a ground incursion into the region. But Israel has vowed to press on without its support. And fears of a more intense military push into Rafah come amid word that a team of international doctors, including several Americans, are trapped at a hospital near Rafah. Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth joins us now. Senator, thank you for joining us. You have a connection to one of these doctors that's trapped there in Rafah. His name is Adam Hamawi. Remind us, what is your connection to him?
20 years ago, when I was wounded in Iraq, Dr. Hamawi was on duty at the ER in Baghdad at the Combat Surgical Hospital, and he saved my life. So when I was wounded, within 20 minutes, I was in front of him, and he is the doctor who not only saved my life, but was able to keep me from becoming a triple amputee by employing a vascular procedure that he just learned in medical school, and saved my right arm.
So, I mean, understandably then, this is quite personal for you, and it's consistent with work that we know other active duty and retired service members like yourself have been doing to get loved ones or the family or friends of loved ones out of harm's way. What are you learning from the State Department in terms of what, if anything, they can do to get him out?
Well, this is not the first group of doctors saving lives in Gaza that I've worked with. I've hosted a group of doctors who've been either in Gaza or we're working with doctors in there, including with Med Global. In January of this year, we did the same thing. We're finding that, the Rafah crossing is closed on the Egyptian side, but the path to the Rafah crossing is very dangerous to humanitarian convoys, and often come under fire from the IDF. So we need to make sure that we get Egypt to open the crossing, but at the same time, get the Israelis to allow a protected corridor for these humanitarian aid convoys to be able to get to the crossing. I've reached out both to our State Department, to our National Security Council, and to the Israeli Embassy, the ambassador here in Washington, D.C., and everybody is doing everything they can to help try to get this group of doctors out, but also the next group of doctors in to help the civilians in Gaza.
And there have been reports that some of these doctors themselves are actually in tough medical condition. What is your understanding of how they are and why it is so urgent that some of them especially get out?
They're in very tough conditions. There's very little food, almost no water, almost no medical supplies left. Each group of doctors that come in is actually bringing medical supplies with them. And as they expend those supplies, helping the wounded, when they come to the end of that, they then transition out, or the next group comes in. But this particular group of doctor is really down, very low in supplies. I'm texting back and forth with Dr. Hamawi, and it's just checking on him and the status of his colleagues, and they're doing everything that they can. They're continuing to work to supply aid and humanitarian aid, but at the same time, they themselves are dehydrated. They're running low on everything, not just medical supplies, but food and water as well.
And it speaks to the adverse conditions that medical professionals of all nationalities who've been working there in Gaza have endured since this began back in October. Look, more broadly, do you have any sense of how many U.S. citizens or families of American citizens remain in southern Gaza amid fears of a bigger military operation that may be trying to get out?
I don't have a number to give to you, but I will tell you that we're working very hard to try to get as many out as possible. At the same time, we're needing to make sure that humanitarian aid convoys are able to get in and out of Gaza, and that we make sure that innocent civilians are not, especially in these humanitarian convoys, are being injured. And at the same time, we need to make a path for these doctors to get in and out. But we are trying to help as many as we can. At the same time, we understand, Israel was attacked on October 7th. Israelis have the right to defend themselves. Hamas needs to release the hostages. There is a very viable peace deal on the table that Hamas has now rejected twice. It involves releasing the hostages. They need to do that. They could have a mutual ceasefire tomorrow if Hamas would agree to it. At the same time, we also need to make sure that civilians are protected.
And how do you assess the White House's involvement in these ongoing talks? They doing enough? They doing not too much?
I think they're doing everything that they can. I think President Biden has shown some real tough leadership, and sometimes having to have very tough conversations with a friend like Israel. But at the same time, again, there is a very viable ceasefire offer on the table right now that Hamas is rejecting. And so we need to go to our friends in Qatar to say, hey, if Hamas is not going to negotiate, then what are you doing hosting, Hamas in Qatar? This is a very complicated situation. At the same time, we need to make sure that the aid continues to flow into Gaza to take care of the wounded civilians.
Well, Senator, you and I, in different positions many years ago, talked about what you call and what others who've been injured in war call their Alive Day, which, as you point out, is nearly 20 years from, is coming up on 20 years. So, I can imagine for you making sure that the Dr. Hamawi and the others get out as quickly as possible because of the work he did to save your life and to put you where you are, help put you where you are today. So we thank you for sharing an update with us. Best of luck to them, and please keep us posted.
I will. Thank you.
All righty. Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ukraine tonight. Blinken taking time out from diplomatic talks to show his support in a different way. That is your Secretary of State playing the guitar in an underground bar in Kyiv. He joined a Ukrainian group and sang the chorus to Rockin' in the Free World. For the uninitiated, that is a political rock song by the great Neil Young. Cool to see there. It is decision day in Maryland as voters head to the polls to pick the Democrat that will face off against former Governor Larry Hogan for the state's U.S. Senate seat. We are tracking that primary and the votes in West Virginia and Nebraska. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides. The data desk. And that's because voters in Maryland, West Virginia, and Nebraska are casting ballots in their state's primary contests today. In the Free State, Senate candidates are vying to replace the retiring Democrat Ben Cardin. That party's primary is a tight one between Congressman David Trone and Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks. The winner is set to face Republican Larry Hogan. The state's former governor casting his ballot earlier today. He's long been a Trump critic and has pitched himself as a moderate willing to bridge the divide in Washington. Anthony Salvanto and Scott McFarland join us now. Anthony is our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys. Scott, of course, a CBS News congressional correspondent. We begin with you, Mr. McFarland. What are the differences, the big differences, between David Trone and Angela Alsobrooks?
Oh, they'll make a lot of arguments, Ed, about the many, many differences between them. But when it comes to policy and big picture of the U.S. Senate, they're very much aligned. Two progressive Democrats representing a very blue state. So really, the more fundamental, practical bottom line is money. David Trone is a wealthy man and has spent tens of millions of dollars on his congressional races and on this Senate primary just to win the nomination, and would enter a general election equipped with his own money to fund a very tough battle against potentially a very popular Republican. As he voted this morning in Potomac, Maryland, I asked Congressman Trone how much he'd be willing to spend. Take a listen.
We're going to spend whatever it takes to beat Larry Hogan. We have to hold the Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate. I mean, it's just that simple. We cannot go back to MAGA tax policies. We cannot go back to not having a chance to rectify the Dobbs decision. You know, we have big things we have to accomplish in Washington.
On Ed, they split up all the powerful endorsements. Mr. Trone has some, Ms. Alsobrooks has some. She has the governor behind her. She also has the endorsement of Emily's List, which supports women candidates who support women's reproductive rights. By all accounts, this promises to be close, and whoever wins the opportunity to try to beat Larry Hogan in Maryland. Very difficult thing.
We can't understate how nasty and personal this primary has gotten, because you're right. Otherwise, on policy, they agree on just about everything. But it's come down to strategy and race and gender and geography. And it's exactly what Democrats were hoping to avoid, because, Anthony Salvanto, this now stands the chance of becoming a competitive Senate contest. What exactly are you watching for in the Free State tonight?
Indeed, Ed. Start with this, and I'll go back to 2020. This is the presidential race in Maryland. The reason we don't talk about Maryland a lot is this blue section right here between D.C. and Baltimore. Democrats do exceptionally well, and they run up the score. But hold on, you mentioned Larry Hogan. Well, a lot of folks think, he's obviously the favorite there on the Republican side for the Senate seat. So let me show you his map from 2018, because this is what's going to have some Democrats nervous. This map just got a lot redder, especially this area in here between D.C. and Baltimore. Not only that, but he also managed to hold down Democratic margins as you get further out in those D.C. suburbs. And this is something we'll talk about more as the campaign rolls on. But the bigger point here then is, if Larry Hogan has a track record of winning in Maryland, then, we fast forward to tonight and we start saying, okay, what happens as this plays out. It might be a contest between whether Democrats are trying to aim to run up that score in and around D.C., also Brooks is from here, from Prince George's County, or David Trone, who represents this part of the state, and maybe run up the score a little bit more in some of those suburbs. I don't know, but that's the argument that they're making, and some of the vote patterns we see tonight might start to tell that story, Ed.
We shall see. There's also a competitive congressional primary in the 3rd District. Scott McFarland, it's a retiring Congressman, John Sarbanes, but one of the names, one of the faces involved in this is quite well known to viewers of the news. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, running for that seat. Tell us about his candidacy.
Well, he has raised nearly $5 million in his first run for office, and let that just sink in for a moment. One of the top challengers among the 24 others running for this nomination is a state senator named Sarah Elfreth, who represents Annapolis and kind of the eastern part of that congressional district. It can be very competitive. It likely will be very close. Whoever wins that primary is an overwhelming favorite in November. So we watch to see for the results there. But I'll also add, Ed, the race to succeed David Trone in that Western Maryland district also is competitive. And that may be one that's tight in November. That might be an actual general election fight, a rare thing in a blue state.
Yeah. Real quick, there is also a Senate primary in West Virginia tonight. We're expecting the state's governor, Jim Justice, to become the Republican nominee and probably run away with it. Anthony, set the West Virginia and Maryland Senate races against the rest of the Senate map, how they factor into which party might control the upper chamber come November.
Okay, real quick, this race on the Democratic side is notable. Who is not here, that is Joe Manchin. He's not running. That means folks generally think that this state will revert back to its very red setup, which is, Donald Trump has won this state easily. It's very Republican, which sets up a possible pickup, a likely pickup for the Republicans in the Senate race. You mentioned Neil Young earlier. We probably have to go back to the Mirror Ball Pearl Jam collaboration days of the 90s to find a time when the Democrats won West Virginia statewide there at the presidential level, Ed.
That was a deep reference there, Anthony Salvanto. Impressive. I applaud you for that one. Anthony Salvanto and Scott McFarland taking a look at politics here in the Mid-Atlantic, the DMV area, and how they'll factor into the national contests come November. Thank you both.
You know who ultimately actually cast the vote on this case? It's not just the jurors in that jury box. It's every one of you at home. It's every American who votes this November.
We'll talk a bit more about the Trump criminal case sideshow as former President Trump's trial turns into a tryout. The allies and VP contenders who are making their cases in Lower Manhattan. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for sticking with us. Several political allies of former President Donald Trump attended his criminal hush money trial in Manhattan today. That includes several members of Congress and some of his former rivals for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. Our Robert Costa is outside the courthouse in Manhattan, where it's been a bit of a day inside and outside the courthouse. Bob, the appearance especially of Speaker Johnson, curious what that sort of says about the former president's hold over the Republican Party.
It said a lot about where the Republican Party is right now, Ed. You see the Speaker of the House, second in line to the presidency, showing up here in Lower Manhattan to show his own solidarity with former President Donald Trump. His appearance was relatively muted. I stood just a few steps away from the Speaker as he addressed reporters in the park nearby. The courthouse, he said he was there to show support for Trump, but he did not take any questions, and he sort of rushed away quickly after making a few minutes of a statement. And it's indicative that he doesn't want to wade into the details with reporters, didn't have a news conference, but he did want to, broadly speaking, show his support for Trump.
And he wasn't the only Republican there. There have been several vice presidential running mate hopefuls who've come to Manhattan over the course of the trial. How could their presence actually meaningfully impact their chances of becoming Trump's running mate?
There has been a parade of different Republicans who have come to this site to show their support for Trump. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, for example, was one of them here today. He is largely seen as a real contender to be Trump's running mate. Also, Vivek Ramaswamy, the former presidential candidate, was here, and I had a chance to speak with him. Let's listen.
Is in here, Vivek. Everyone's talking about the
Do you believe
temperature.
Republicans will stand by him even if he's convicted? I think every American should stand by him, especially because of the injustice of this prosecution.
But are there any cracks in the Republican Party as this trial unfolds?
I think it's about Americans, right? I don't look at the partisan nature of this.
So you see from Vivek Ramaswamy a lot of support for Trump, but this is also about the Republican Party holding together. I asked Ramaswamy, do you see any cracks in the party? He, of course, said he did not see any at all at this moment. This is a Republican Party, whether it's former rivals of Trump in the presidential race on Capitol Hill. This is a party that's standing with its likely nominee, the expected nominee. They're not getting into this case and the character questions that are hovering over it. Instead, they see this, in their view, as a political enterprise that's being mounted by the attorney here in Manhattan, the District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and they're attacking him again and again, essentially echoing how Trump is approaching this case. And it shows how, while this is a legal matter playing out hour by hour, it is also charged by politics coming in the center of the political campaign.
And we should point out these visits come, of course, as Michael Cohen continues his testimony inside the courtroom. You know him, you've talked to him about this in advance, and you've been monitoring his testimony throughout the day. Your impressions of how he's done on the stand?
He has been relatively calm. There have been times in interviews and in public appearances and sometimes on the stand where Cohen can be combative and volatile, but he has been relatively contained during his testimony, working with the prosecution during the early set of questions. It's gotten a bit different as the defense has begun its cross-examination, Cohen leaning in a bit more into his answers, showing a bit more of emotion, a bit more of attitude that is typical of Michael Cohen from these types of settings.
Robert Costa outside Manhattan Criminal Court there in New York. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's pick up on this a bit more with Molly Ball and Kadia Goba. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Kadia is a political reporter for Semaphore, that yellow publication, if you ever get it in your email or read it online. It's also her birthday. Can you believe she's spending it with us? Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So you get the first question. Sure. What do you make of all this going on in New York? Why are these guys going up there?
Yeah, so
especially the speaker.
I know. When I talk to lawmakers, they say, well, they take issue with saying that they benefit explicitly from going up there, but I can't imagine why they wouldn't. We all know that Trump is very big on loyalty, and I think someone or a lawmaker going to a trial of his where, you know, he's on trial for hush money and really lashing out against the prosecutor, that says that you're a loyal soldier, and I think, you know, I don't think it impacts VP situations, but, you know, people are probably fishing for cabinet offices should he take the Oval.
I mean, the fact that the Speaker of the House, a constitutional officer, went up to Manhattan today to question the motives of the prosecutor, it's once again a Rubicon crossing kind of moment.
Well, we've never had a former president and current presidential nominee on criminal trial before, so all kinds of new things are happening in American politics. Look, there's an inside message and an outside message that these Republicans are sending, right? As Kadia said, the inside message is the message they're sending to Trump. I'm with you, I'm loyal, you can count on me. They know that he values that. There's a little bit of sucking up in the event that Trump has ideas about how he wants to staff his next administration. And then externally, obviously, it's about controlling the narrative, right? It's saying the things that Trump can't say because of his gag order. And it's really setting the perspective of American voters about what this trial means. We're going to potentially have a verdict pretty soon. This case is wrapping up, and it's going to all be about, depending on how it goes for Trump, how the public views this trial. Do they view the charges as legitimate, or do they come to see it through his frame? And I think we've seen some evidence in the way the polls have moved over the course of the trial that more and more voters are seeing it through the prism that Trump wants them to see it, the political frame.
Right. And here we are talking about the sidekicks that showed up and not the guy who was on the stand today. We talked about him earlier, but like we're taking time away from discussion the substance of the trial to talk about the politics because we've never seen anything quite like this before.
I would also add that, you know, the House is a mess, especially Republicans in Congress. So it's probably a good idea to latch yourself to the leader of the party. It's usually the opposite, but they're actually benefiting from this, you know, to their voters, you know, who they're probably signaling, well, we're still extremely MAGA, even though the House is in disarray. So I think there's a lot of dynamics at play.
It is primary night in America yet again because it's a Tuesday. They're voting somewhere. Maryland, West Virginia, Nebraska. West Virginia Senate primary. Jim Justice, the Republican governor, going to become the Republican Senate nominee, face a Democrat who will likely trail. It's the Maryland Senate contest that's suddenly become a thing. And this contest between Angela Alsobrooks, who's the executive of Prince George's County, one of the suburban counties here in D.C., and David Trone, who runs essentially a wine company, made a lot of money that way, kind of speak to like the yin and yang of the Democratic Party right now, right? Wealthy guy who could self-finance, a woman who represents the most loyal voting bloc of the Democratic Party, its future, a chance for an African-American woman to join the Senate. It's kind of exactly what they would not have liked to have happened, but it's happened.
It's a big mess. Well, and as you say, Trone has spent more of his own money than any candidate in history on this primary, over $60 million. And he seems to be flailing. He very well could lose to a candidate who has a fraction of that money, doesn't have any of her own money, has had to, raise it like a real politician. She's, the very well-regarded county executive of Prince George's County outside of D.C. He's been in Congress, having spent quite a lot of his own money to win that seat in Congress as well. She's got a lot of the elected officials behind her in Maryland, and she seems to have been gaining on him in the final days, but I think it's going to be close. And as you say, it's a real signpost for the future of the Democratic Party, which way they decide to take this. Do they go with the well-qualified but underfunded black woman, or do they go with this rich white guy in what could be a very competitive race in November against Larry Hogan?
What are you watching for, Kadia, in this?
I would also argue that Democrats just don't want to see this fight. They would rather be putting their energy and their extra money into the general election that's going to come after this primary. We see the same thing happening in New York with Jamal Bowman and Latimer. They just don't want to have you. I don't think you'll have a lot of members of Congress coming out for either or. Yeah. It's really touchy, and I don't think Democrats are happy that this is happening or getting so messy.
We will see who prevails and then who takes on the Republican Larry Hogan. Molly Ball, Kadia Goba, happy birthday. I'd sing, but we don't have enough time. Sorry. Thank you both for being here.
I do believe that there is interference in our elections.
Do you believe the results?
I would have to say at this time, no, I do not.
That woman you just heard says the last election was stolen from Donald Trump, and now she wants a role in deciding the 2024 race. We'll take a closer look. You're streaming America Decides. A new CBS News investigation explores how those who still don't believe the 2020 election results are affecting the one happening this year. There are nearly 80 officials working in election oversight positions across 7 swing states who are considered election deniers by CBS News. That means they either don't believe in the 2020 results, refuse to certify that election, publicly supported the January 6 Capitol riots, or have pushed election conspiracies. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns has been looking into this with our investigative unit and is here with us now. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You traveled out to Nevada as part of this investigation.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what that trip revealed to you.
Yeah, well, as you know, Nevada is a critical battleground state, always has been. Washoe County is a swing county in a swing state. And when you think of Nevada, you think, yes, they are consequential when it comes to the presidential election, often balance of power in the U.S. Senate. But one of the most, arguably important races happening there is one you may not have heard of, which is for county commission. Now, the county commission essentially oversees elections. They appoint the top election official, they set the budget for elections, and most importantly, they certify elections. And there is a very hotly contested commission race happening in Washoe, which includes Reno. This is the second largest city in Nevada, or county in Nevada, so critical area there. And there is a wealthy right-wing donor activist who has espoused all sorts of election conspiracy theories and has been promoted by people like Steve Bannon and others trying to kind of put his thumb on the scale in this race. He has spent heavily on this commission race. He has really essentially said that he wants to shape this commission. He just needs one more vote to have a majority to be able to go his way.
It's a good example of wealthy donors swaying local elections that are going to have national implications potentially.
Yeah, and there's a reason for it, because this is where it's all happening, right? I mean, we interviewed him and he essentially acknowledged to us, yeah, lots of people are paying attention to the House, the Senate, the presidency, but this is where you really make a difference.
Now, you spoke with Nevada's Secretary of State, who is a Democrat.
Right.
Obviously, for partisan reasons, would be concerned about this, but it runs deeper than that. What did he tell you?
That's right. Of course, he oversees elections in the state, but elections are run at the county level. And so he was very concerned about this type of activism in these races. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I think it's important to realize that we are in a national election. That national election is be run at the local level. And at that local level, they can completely shut down the election for the state and for the nation.
And that just underscores, you know, what we're talking about here in the stakes, right? We don't have a national election. Elections are run at the local level, and they're not even run at the state level. They're, you know, administered by local officials. So this is kind of the frontier to look at when we're talking about election denialism.
And all of this comes as we continue to hear prominent Republican leaders across the country not commit to accepting the results of the 2024 elections.
That's exactly right. And we've seen that recently with prominent Republicans who are supporting Donald Trump. So they are kind of top surrogates for him on high-profile shows or, you know, appearing with him during his court cases, not committing to accepting the results of this election. And that's something we should watch for, you know, with every candidate, right? Are you committed to these results? We also know that the RNC has been very active in filing lawsuits across the country. In Nevada, for example, they filed a lawsuit challenging Nevada law, which allows you to count mail-in ballots a few days after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. They want to now prevent that, Republicans do. So that's another kind of thing to watch for, are all of these lawsuits preemptively ahead of this election.
The biggest debate going into November may be, what is the definition of a fair election? Because that's what we keep hearing these Republican leaders say. Well, if it's fair, I'll support the results.
The big if, right? And so, as you well note, that there have been all of these caveats, conditions to supporting the election, and something that you and I are going to be watching and following and holding people accountable for.
Yes, indeed. Caitlin Huey Burns, thank you for that, and to the investigative unit. And coming up, President Biden gets the backing of the largest Latino civil rights organization. Why that matters heading into November. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back. We have spent a lot of time talking on this program, and will continue to, about the Latino vote in this country, the second largest group of voting age Americans, and an increasingly influential one that appears to be up for grabs this year. Well, today, the largest Latino civil rights organization gave President Biden its backing. The Unidos U.S. Action Fund endorsed the president at an event in Phoenix, Arizona, and it also announced support for Arizona Democratic Senate candidate Ruben Gallego, who's running against Republican Kari Lake. Let's bring in Nydia Cavazos, who covers the Biden campaign for us. Nydia, good to see you. Walk us through what political influence this group has.
Ed, we're talking about the largest Latino civil rights organization in the country, and it has an extensive political influence, especially when it comes to mobilizing Latino voters. This is a group that has the resources to focus on outreach efforts and to make sure that the over 36.2 million Latinos in the country who are currently eligible to vote will actually go on to do so in November of 2024. But we know, of course, that before this, they have to register, and so a lot of their efforts are focused on voter registration. And now, while Unidos U.S. Action Fund did endorse Biden for re-election, their president told me that they're also calling on the Biden and Harris campaign to do more, to reach out to Latino voters, but on the ground. Let's take a listen.
One of the biggest barriers to voter turnout has been a lack of investment in mobilizing in Latino voters. We saw last election that very few Latino voters were actually contacted by either party or by the candidates to go out and either register to vote and vote on election day.
Now, Unido's U.S. Action Fund will be helping President Biden when it comes to doing the outreach for Latinos because they'll be focused on key swing states like Arizona. They're going to be reaching out to voters in conventional ways such as door knocking. They're going to be making phone calls and really making an effort to meet these Latinos in person so that they can deliver the necessary information so that they can know where to vote, how to vote, and can actually go on to do so in November. Ed?
Nydia Cavazos tracking the Biden campaign and the all-important Latino vote. Thank you so much. In other news, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign says they've turned in the required amount of signatures to get on the ballot in November in Texas. After announcing that, the independent presidential candidate rallied voters in Austin alongside his running mate, Nicole Shanahan. Our Ali Novello is covering RFK Jr.'s campaign for CBS News and is back from Austin with a little more on how this all went. So walk us through what Kennedy being on the ballot in places like Texas now means and how the process of getting on the ballot is going in the rest of the country.
Absolutely. So getting on the ballot in Texas is no easy feat. You need well over 113,000 signatures, right? And so getting on the ballot in Texas for Kennedy is a huge win because it means he's one step closer to reaching his goal of getting on the ballot in all 50 states. He said he's hoping to accomplish this goal by the end of July. Yesterday at his voter rally in Austin, Texas, he said Texas and New York were two of the most difficult states for him. So again, it's a huge win.
And this map here shows us the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states in yellow where he's on the ballot, the 8 or so now where he says he's got enough signatures to be on the ballot but hasn't turned in the ballots. Why not?
Well, it's a strategic effort by the campaign. If he turns in the signatures, he leaves more room for his political opponents to challenge the validity of those signatures. So the longer they wait, the less time his opponents have.
All right, so he's playing games with the Ballot Access Project as well. Now, Nicole Shanahan being there was notable because we haven't really seen her in this setting, this sort of rally setting. What did she have to say? How was she received?
That's right. So her speech was similar to the speech she gave during her Revelation event in California at the end of March. She talked about food production, soil, clean water, and she talked about her path to becoming an independent candidate as a former Democrat. Let's take a listen.
Up until last year, I was a pretty heavy Democratic Party donor because I believed that if I could just get the ear of party leaders, they would implement common sense policies in agriculture, health, and technology. When I did get their ear, they would smile and nod, but somehow nothing ever seemed to really get done.
Was there anything that she didn't say, perhaps, that stuck out to you?
Well, I think it's notable that she didn't talk about abortion rights. Over the weekend, we saw Kennedy change his stance on the issue. He now supports a federal ban on late-term abortions. And that's different from just a few days before, where he said he supported late-term abortions and that it was a woman's right to choose. Nicole Shanahan was surprised by that, and she made no mention of it during her speech. So that was definitely notable, Ed.
So Democrats, Republicans, and independents struggling to figure out how exactly to campaign on abortion rights this year. Ali Novello, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ed.
Finally tonight, you've heard this before. A bill in Congress gets intercepted just before crossing the end zone, so to speak. Well, in this case, it's a bill that would give Washington, D.C. the power to use federal land to allow the Washington Commanders NFL team to build a new stadium. Their current facility over in suburban Maryland is 27 years old and unpopular with fans. Well, Montana Senator Steve Daines announced he plans to block the bill unless the football team honors a Montana man who helped design their previous logo. The Washington Commanders' prior logo, this one, it's a controversial silhouette of a Native American chief, was created by Walter Blackie Wetzel in 1972. He's a member of the Blackfeet Nation, one of the 10 largest tribes in the United States, spanning parts of Montana. We should point out, Daines isn't calling for the return of the previous team name, just wants to ensure that they honor that previous logo. That does it for today. We'll be back with another episode of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts now.